The day was meant to be perfect. Golden sunlight spilled across the rolling hills of Willow Creek Gardens, a quiet venue beside a small lake just outside the city. Rows of white chairs gleamed under the afternoon sky. Fresh roses swayed gently in the breeze, and laughter drifted through the air as guests arrived, dressed in soft colors and hopeful smiles. At the center of it all stood Malik Carter, tall, calm, confident, a man whose steady gaze could silence a room without a single word. And beside him, radiant in her lace gown, was Naomi Brooks. Her joy was so pure it seemed to draw light itself. This was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives, but happiness can turn fragile in a heartbeat. From across the hedges that bordered the venue, a single voice broke the peace. A sharp, cutting voice that carried more than sound, and it carried judgment. "Look at them," the woman sneered. "Pretending they belong here. I'm calling the police right now." Every conversation died. Music faded. Forks paused mid-air. Naomi froze, bouquet trembling in her hands. The laughter and warmth that had filled the air moments earlier vanished, replaced by confusion and disbelief. Malik's jaw clenched. He turned toward the source of the voice, a woman standing at the edge of the property. Middle-aged, crisp polo shirt. Phone already pressed to her ear. Her name was Linda Harrow. And though the guests didn't know it yet, her phone call would change more than just the wedding. It would expose everything that was wrong with how people see each other. The guests murmured anxiously as Linda shouted into her phone. "Yes, there's a group of strangers here. They broke into the property. They don't belong. Send someone quick." The words hung in the air like poison. Naomi's mother reached for her daughter's arm, eyes wide. "Honey, is she serious?" Before anyone could answer, the faint sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder, closer, impossible to ignore. 2 police cruisers pulled into the venue's driveway, tires crunching against the gravel. Blue lights flashed against the trees. A silence deeper than sound fell over the ceremony. The officers stepped out, hands resting near their holsters, scanning the scene with practiced suspicion. The bride's father moved instinctively forward, but Malik raised a hand, stopping him. "Let me handle this." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority lived in his tone. Linda marched toward the officers, pointing back toward the wedding arch. "There, that's them. I've lived next to this place for 15 years. They have no reservation. They're trespassing." Her words carried the certainty of someone who had never been challenged. The officers hesitated, their gazes shifting from the accuser to the wedding party, a gathering of well-dressed black families and friends. Frozen in disbelief, Naomi's heart pounded. She looked at Malik, who stood completely still, calm, controlled. But she could see the quiet storm building behind his eyes. He reached into his jacket pocket slowly. One of the officers stiffened, hand hovering near his gun. Linda smirked triumphantly. "See? He's probably reaching for a weapon." But Malik wasn't reaching for a weapon. He pulled out a polished badge, gleaming in the sunlight, and held it up high. "Sheriff Malik Carter," he said evenly. "This is my wedding. We booked this venue 6 months ago, paid in full." The officers froze. The silence that followed felt endless. The lead officer stepped back, lowering his hand from his holster. "Sheriff Carter?" I didn't realize," Linda's smile faltered. Her confidence cracked. Color drained from her face as the reality of her mistake began to sink in. The guests stared, some in disbelief, others in anger, but all understanding the same truth. If Malik hadn't been wearing that badge, this day could have ended very differently, but the damage was done. The celebration had been tainted, the air thick with something unspoken, the sting of humiliation, the ache of being doubted for simply existing. Naomi's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Malik reached for her hand, steady and sure. "We're going to finish what we started," he said softly. "No one ruins this day for us." She nodded, trying to smile through the ache. The ceremony continued, but the joy had dimmed, replaced by a tension that lingered like smoke. And while the vows were spoken, another story was already beginning. One that would stretch far beyond the wedding arch, because Linda Harrow wasn't finished. And neither was Malik Carter. The days leading up to the wedding had been full of joy. Malik and Naomi had spent months planning every detail. They'd walked through the venue weeks earlier, imagining how it would all look. The sunlight over the lake, the sound of soft music, The moment they would say, "I do." Naomi had fallen in love with Willow Creek Gardens the first time she saw it. The place seemed like a dream, quiet and full of charm. The lawns rolled gently toward a small pier, and the air smelled faintly of lavender. She had imagined her family laughing there, her nieces running barefoot through the grass. Malik had loved it too, but for a different reason. It was peaceful, secluded. He wanted to give Naomi a day untouched by the noise of the world. But even then, something in him had hesitated. When they toured the venue months earlier, he had noticed the house next door. A 2-story colonial home with a white fence and a flag fluttering out front. From that porch, Linda Harrow had watched them the first day they visited. Her arms folded, her face expressionless, she hadn't said a word. But Malik had felt her eyes on them the entire time. Probably just curious, Naomi had said when he mentioned it. It's a small town. People notice new faces, he had smiled. But he hadn't forgotten. Now as the wedding day unfolded, that same woman's voice had cut into their happiness like a blade. Hours before the ceremony, Malik and Naomi had arrived early with their families. Naomi's parents brought boxes of hand-painted decorations. Her younger brother strung fairy lights through the trees. Laughter filled the air as music played from a speaker. Malik helped carry tables to the reception hall, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his smile easy. "We made it," he told Naomi, setting a box down. "Everything's coming together." "It's better than I imagined," she said, touching his arm. Thomas, the venue coordinator, had greeted them warmly. "Everything's on schedule. The catering team setting up inside, and the florist finished the arch a few minutes ago." From the property line, Linda had been watching again, standing near her fence, her phone in hand, pretending to check something. Her expression was sharp, not curious this time, but assessing. She saw the guests arriving, the laughter, the relaxed clothes before the formal change. She saw family members who looked comfortable, too comfortable as if they truly belonged, and she didn't like it. Inside her house, she muttered to herself, "This place has changed. When the old owner was here, they never rented to just anyone." Her phone buzzed with a neighborhood group chat. She typed a message. "Anyone know what's going on at the gardens today?" Looked suspicious. No one responded right away, but it didn't matter. The thought had already begun to grow in her mind, fed by assumptions she'd never questioned. Back at the venue, Malik's father noticed her by the fence. "Son, you see that woman over there?" Malik nodded. "I see her. She was watching earlier too. Want me to say something?" his father asked. Malik shook his head. "No, not today. Let's not give her space in our story." But Linda wasn't someone who faded quietly. By the time the guests began to arrive in earnest, doctors from Naomi's hospital, Malik's colleagues from the sheriff's department, old friends from college, Linda had made up her mind. She called the venue office first. No answer. The line went straight to voicemail. "Closed for a private event." "Private event, my foot," she muttered. "We'll see about that." She dialed again, this time not the office, but a direct number she'd saved years ago, the one for the venue's owner, Mr. Whitfield. The call rang out. No answer. Her irritation deepened into something sharper. She watched a delivery truck pull up to the side gate. More decorations. More people she didn't recognize. The sight only confirmed what she already believed. By the time the first strains of music began to play for the ceremony, Linda had already picked up her phone again. Her thumb hovered over the numbers for the local police. "This isn't about race," she told herself. "It's about order, about doing things properly." But somewhere deep down she knew that wasn't the truth. Inside, Naomi stood in front of a mirror, her bridesmaids adjusting her veil. "You're glowing," one of them said. Naomi smiled, the reflection of a woman stepping into her future. Outside, Malik adjusted his cufflinks with his best man, Aaron. "Nervous?" Aaron teased. "Not even a little," Malik said. "I've faced armed men in courtroom politics. This is joy." The string quartet began tuning their instruments. Guests took their seats. Laughter rippled through the air, and then Linda appeared again, this time walking across the lawn with firm steps, cutting through the peace of the moment. "Excuse me," she said sharply to Thomas, who was guiding guests. "I need to speak with someone in charge." Thomas offered a polite smile. "Ma'am, this is a private event." "If you're not on the guest list, I've lived next door for 15 years, she interrupted. I know every event that happens here. These people can't just take over the property. I want to see your documentation. Ma'am, please, Thomas began, still trying to stay calm. This is the Carter Brooks wedding. Fully booked, paid months in advance. Linda crossed her arms. Anyone can say that. She spotted Mr. Whitfield near the reception hall and strode toward him. Mr. Whitfield, she called. We need to talk. He turned, surprised. Linda, you shouldn't be here. What's going on? There's an unauthorized event happening right now, she said in a hushed but urgent tone. Did you actually approve this gathering? Whitfield frowned. Yes, the Carter Brooks wedding. I approved it myself. Linda's gaze flicked toward the guests. You're sure about that? She pressed. They don't look like your usual clientele. Whitfield hesitated. That small pause, brief, uncertain, was all she needed. Let me double-check, he said finally. And with that, the first shadow fell over a day that had been built entirely on love and trust. Whitfield walked toward Malik, still adjusting his tie near the arch. Sheriff Carter, he said cautiously, I'm sorry to interrupt, but my neighbor has raised some concerns about your reservation. Malik's eyes hardened slightly. Concerns? She's questioning the legitimacy of the booking. I'm sure it's nothing. Malik nodded once, silent. He took out his phone, pulled up the emails, the receipt, the signed contract, and handed it over. As Whitfield read, Linda hovered close behind him, her tone dripping with accusation. Anyone can fake an email. Where's the paper contract? Naomi approached then, her gown shimmering in the light. Malik, what's happening? He took her hand. Just a misunderstanding. It'll be fine. But deep inside, he felt the first flare of something he hadn't felt in years, that quiet, familiar mix of anger and disappointment. Even as a sheriff, he knew exactly how quickly perception could shift against people like him. The air grew heavier. Guests looked on, whispers spreading like ripples through the crowd. In that moment, a celebration of love had turned into a quiet test of dignity, and though no one realized it yet, it was only the beginning. The air felt heavier with each passing second. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, and the soft hum of the quartet faltered into silence. Naomi's father stood, his posture proud but guarded. Is there a problem? He asked, his voice steady but firm. Mr. Whitfield hesitated, still holding Malik's phone with the open email visible on the screen. There shouldn't be, he said carefully. Everything appears legitimate. I just need to... Linda cut him off before he could finish. Of course it appears legitimate, she snapped. Scammers know how to make anything look official these days. She looked around, raising her voice so everyone could hear. Do any of you honestly believe this? Her words carried through the air like a cold wind, sweeping away what was left of the warmth. Guests began murmuring, some in disbelief, others in quiet outrage. Naomi gripped Malik's hand. Why is she doing this? She whispered. He didn't answer. He just stared at Linda, his jaw set tight. He could see what she was doing. She wasn't looking for truth. She was looking for confirmation of her prejudice. Aaron appeared, carrying a leather folder. Here, he said, the original contract. Malik took it and handed it to Mr. Whitfield. The owner flipped through the pages, nodding. Everything's signed. Deposit received. Reservation confirmed. Let me see that, Linda demanded, leaning closer. That doesn't even look like your signature, Whitfield. How do you know it's real? Because I remember booking it, he said, his patience wearing thin. Now I suggest you return to your property before I have security escort you out. Linda's expression hardened. If you won't do your job, I'll make sure someone else will. She pulled out her phone. Naomi's mother gasped softly. She's calling the police. Malik took a slow breath. He knew what that meant. A situation that could spiral fast no matter how calm he remained. Naomi's voice trembled. Malik, should we stop her? He shook his head. No. Let her call. Let her make her choice. Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens sliced through the air. The sound grew louder until red and blue lights flickered against the wedding arch. Guests turned to look as two police cruisers pulled into the driveway. The string quartet stopped playing completely. Silence took over again. The officers stepped out, hands near their belts, scanning the crowd. One of them spoke to his radio, eyes narrowed as he took in the scene of well-dressed guests and white chairs. Linda hurried to them, waving her arms. There, that's them. They broke in. The venue owner's being intimidated into silence. You need to remove them before they damage the property. Mr. Whitfield looked stunned. This is ridiculous, he muttered. The taller of the two officers approached Malik cautiously. Sir, we received a call about an unauthorized gathering. May I see identification and proof of reservation? Malik's guests began murmuring again. The bride's father stepped forward, angry now. You have no right to interrupt a private ceremony. Dad, Malik said quietly, raising his hand to stop him. It's fine. He turned to the officers, calm and steady. You'll get your proof. He reached into his jacket, moving slowly. One of the officers tensed immediately, his hand twitching near his holster. Linda smirked. See? He's reaching for something. Naomi gasped. But Malik already had the badge in his hand. The metal caught the sunlight like a flash of truth. Sheriff Malik Carter, County Sheriff's Department, he said, his voice low and commanding. This is my wedding. Booked, confirmed, and paid for 6 months ago. The taller officer froze, his posture stiffening as realization washed over him. Sheriff Carter? Yes, Malik said, still calm. Would you like to see my identification too? The officer shook his head quickly. No, sir. That won't be necessary. Behind him, Linda's face went pale. You're a sheriff? She whispered, as if the word itself betrayed her. Naomi stepped beside Malik, her hand still trembling in his. Can we continue now? She asked, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. The officer nodded awkwardly. Yes, ma'am. I apologize for the misunderstanding. But it wasn't just a misunderstanding. Everyone there knew that. It was something uglier, something that couldn't be erased by an apology. Linda backed away slowly, her confidence unraveling. The guests stared at her, some in disbelief, others in disgust. Malik turned to his bride, his eyes softening. Let's finish this. The officiant cleared his throat, voice shaking slightly as he began the vows. Dearly beloved. The word sounded strange now, strained against the weight of what had just happened. Still, Naomi smiled through tears, determined to reclaim the moment. As they spoke their vows, the sound of the lake returned, soft waves brushing against the shore, the wind rustling through the trees. For a few minutes, peace returned. But Malik could feel eyes still watching. Linda stood near the edge of the property, phone still in her hand, her mouth set in a thin line. She wasn't done. When the ceremony ended, applause rippled through the crowd, hesitant at first, then stronger. Naomi laughed shakily, the sound of relief breaking through tension. Malik kissed her hand. We made it, he whispered. Yet in the distance, another cruiser appeared at the entrance. Then another. Naomi's father frowned. What now? Aaron's expression darkened. She's calling again. Malik looked toward the flashing lights, his calm exterior cracking just slightly. Let her, he said under his breath. Let her dig her own grave. Inside the reception tent, guests tried to relax. Music played. Softly, plates clinked, people smiled again, but beneath it all was unease. Conversations stayed hushed, eyes flicked toward the windows every few seconds. Outside, Linda was talking to another officer, gesturing animatedly. Malik could see her lips forming the same words. Unauthorized, dangerous, suspicious. The same story she'd been telling her whole life. And just like that, the night that was supposed to celebrate love became a test of endurance, of patience, of truth. Malik knew something now with absolute certainty. This wasn't just about one wedding. It was about every assumption that had ever followed him into a room. Naomi reached for his hand under the table. We'll get through this, she whispered. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. We already have, he said quietly. Now the rest of them have to face it. What no one knew yet was that before the night ended, Malik Carter would make a call of his own, a call that would turn a simple wedding into a story the entire county would remember. And that story was just beginning to unfold. The quiet between songs was heavy enough to feel. Guests tried to smile, tried to pretend that the unease outside didn't exist, but everyone felt it pressing in. Naomi's mother whispered prayers under her breath, her fingers worrying the edge of her napkin. Malik stood near the dance floor, the glow from the string lights catching on his badge as he tucked it back into his pocket. Linda was still out there. He could see her silhouette pacing near the officers, her gestures sharp, her words carried faintly through the open door. It wasn't over. She wasn't finished being right in her own mind. Naomi joined him. Her dress rustled softly as she walked. "They're saying we might need to move everything inside," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it shook. "The police suggested it. Said it would be easier to control the situation." Malik looked at her, really looked at her. "Control what?" he asked. "A family dancing? Children laughing?" He exhaled, the anger finally breaking through his calm. "They don't want control. They want silence." She reached up, smoothing his collar. "Then let's not give them silence. Let's finish our dance." The band hesitated when he led her onto the floor. Then the music started again, slow and trembling at first, like it wasn't sure it was allowed. People began clapping softly, their rhythm growing stronger as Malik and Naomi swayed together. For a few precious moments, the room remembered what it had come here for. Then the doors opened. 2 officers stepped in, hats in hand, their expressions apologetic. Behind them stood Linda, her face stiff with satisfaction. "I told you," she said loudly. "You can't ignore me. They have no authorization to be here." Gasps filled the room. The band stopped mid-note. The lead officer looked at Malik, then at the guests packed into the small space. "Sir," he said carefully, "we've received another complaint. We just need to verify a few details." Malik's hand tightened around Naomi's. "We've verified everything already." 3 times Linda crossed her arms. "You can't trust a piece of paper. They probably forged it." Aaron stood from his table. "That's enough," he said sharply. "You've harassed them since this morning. You're lucky the sheriff has more patience than I do." "Patience?" Linda repeated. "You call this patience?" "I call it intimidation." The officer glanced at Malik. "Sheriff Carter, maybe if we could step outside for a moment." Naomi's father rose. "He's not going anywhere," he said, voice rising. "This is his wedding," but Malik lifted a hand, calm as ever. "It's all right," he said. "If that's what it takes to end this, I'll talk to them." He kissed Naomi's hand, whispered something only she could hear, and followed the officers out. Outside, the air was cooler, filled with the faint hum of cicadas and the pulsing blue of police lights. Malik stood tall, his presence commanding even without the badge showing. "Lieutenant," he said quietly to the senior officer, "I'm giving you one chance to fix this before it goes any further. You've got 2 options. You can either shut this down properly and file your report as false, or you can let me call your commissioner and explain why his department interrupted a lawful event for the 2nd time in one night." The officer swallowed hard. "Sir, with respect," she said. "She said," Malik interrupted, his voice low but hard, "because you listened." He pointed toward Linda, who was still standing near the fence. "You saw the truth the moment you arrived, but her voice carried more weight than your eyes." "That's the problem." The lieutenant hesitated. Malik pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "You have 10 minutes," he said. "After that, I make the call." Inside the tent, Naomi tried to keep her guests calm. She smiled when people looked her way, poured water for the children, made small talk that didn't matter. Every few minutes, she glanced at the door. Aaron moved close. "He's handling it," he said. "I know," she replied softly. "But he shouldn't have to." Outside, Malik's voice was quiet but firm as he spoke into his phone. The call lasted less than a minute. When he hung up, he looked at the lieutenant again. "They'll be here soon," he said simply. "Who?" the officer asked, already dreading the answer. "You'll see." Linda frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I called the authorities. I have every right to question." "No," Malik said, turning toward her. "You had a right to ask once. You lost that right when you lied. You called 3 times. You accused innocent people. You turned a wedding into a scene. You didn't call because you were afraid. You called because you thought you could. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The anger that had fueled her all day finally cracked under the weight of being seen for what it was. Within minutes, 2 unmarked cars pulled up behind the cruisers. The engines cut off and 3 men stepped out, one in a dark suit, one in full-dress uniform, and one carrying a folder under his arm. The lieutenant stiffened instantly. "Commissioner Torres," he muttered. The man in the suit nodded once and walked straight to Malik. "Sheriff Carter," he said, shaking his hand. "Heard there was an issue." Malik stepped aside, gesturing toward Linda. "There's your issue." Linda took a step back. "I didn't know," she stammered. "I didn't know who he was." "That's not the point," the commissioner said flatly. "You didn't care who he was." Behind him, Chief Daniels, the man in uniform, looked past them toward the tent where music had fallen silent. "This the wedding?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Daniels' gaze hardened. "Let's fix this." He walked straight into the tent, his boots echoing against the floorboards. The guests stared, unsure what to expect. Naomi rose when she saw him, confusion flickering across her face. The chief smiled gently. "Sorry for the intrusion, ma'am. I'm the police chief. I also happen to be Malik's mentor." He turned to the guests. "I came to apologize. What happened tonight was wrong." Murmurs filled the room. The weight that had held everyone's breath eased slightly. Outside, Linda watched through the glass, her face pale. She turned to leave, but the commissioner's voice stopped her. "You'll stay right here," he said. "You started this. You'll see it finished." The officers who had arrived earlier now looked ashamed, some avoiding Malik's eyes completely. Inside, Chief Daniels addressed the crowd again. The responding units failed to verify facts before acting. "That's going to change." He paused, letting his words settle. "But it starts with accountability." Naomi moved toward Malik when he came back inside. "Is it over?" she whispered. "Not yet," he said quietly. "But it will be." Linda was escorted in moments later, her head bowed but her eyes defiant. Malik faced her, his calm now sharper than any anger. "You came here to ruin something beautiful," he said softly. "Instead, you revealed exactly what needs to change." The commissioner looked at her, his voice measured. "Ms. Harrow, you'll be facing charges for filing a false report on harassment. Officers will take your statement tonight." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Linda's lips trembled. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," he said. Malik took Naomi's hand again, leading her back to the dance floor. The band hesitated, then began to play. This time, the applause that rose was different. Not polite, not celebratory, but proud. Naomi rested her head against Malik's chest. "You handled that like a storm," she murmured. He smiled faintly. "Storms clear the air, but the night wasn't over. There would be hearings, statements, consequences. Yet in that moment, surrounded by family and truth, Malik finally felt something close to peace. Because even though the world outside their dance still had miles to go, the silence that followed was no longer built on fear. It was the silence that comes after thunder, heavy but cleansing, and the echoes of that night were only just beginning to spread. A week later, the county administration building buzzed with quiet tension. The meeting room smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the kind of place where decisions changed lives. Malik sat at one end of the long oak table, not in uniform this time but in a dark suit. His badge rested on the table beside him, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Naomi sat beside him, her hand resting on his arm. Across from them sat a half-circle of officials, the county commissioner, the legal counsel, and representatives from the management company that owned Willow Creek Gardens. Everyone knew why they were there. What had happened at the wedding had spread far beyond the town. The commissioner cleared his throat. "Sheriff Carter, Mrs. Carter, we appreciate you coming. We've reviewed the footage and the witness statements. The situation was deeply troubling." Naomi folded her hands together. "Troubling?" she repeated softly. It was humiliating. No one spoke for a long moment. Malik reached into a folder and slid a USB drive across the table. "That's every piece of evidence we collected. Recordings, call logs, written statements from guests, even timestamps of when the false reports were made." The county attorney plugged it in, projecting a video onto the screen. The room fell silent as the recording began. Linda's voice echoed through the speakers. "They don't belong here. They just showed up. I'm calling the police. The footage cut to the flashing lights, the officers stepping out of their cruisers, the murmurs of frightened guests. Then Malik's calm voice, steady even under pressure. Sheriff Malik Carter, County Sheriff's Department. This is my wedding. Several officials shifted in their seats. One woman covered her mouth. When the video ended, Malik leaned forward. That wasn't the first time she's done this. We found that she's filed multiple complaints about suspicious gatherings over the years. Every single one against families of color. And the venue manager ignored it. The Prestige venue's representative, a woman with sharp eyes and a tight ponytail, spoke next. Mr. Whitfield has already been suspended. We didn't know the extent of these incidents until now. Naomi looked at her directly. You didn't want to know, she said. You just didn't want trouble. The woman didn't deny it. She only nodded, shame softening her expression. The commissioner turned to Malik. We're recommending criminal charges against Ms. Harrow for filing a false police report and inciting racial harassment. The officers involved are also under internal review. Good, Malik said simply. The room fell quiet again until Naomi spoke, her tone calm but unyielding. We don't want just punishment. We want change. We want this to mean something. Malik slid another document forward. That's why we're proposing a reform plan. New complaint verification procedures, bias response training, and an accountability review board that includes members of the community. The commissioner took the papers, flipping through them slowly. Ambitious, he said, but necessary. The county attorney nodded. And justified. For the first time since the meeting began, Malik leaned back. Then let's start there. Weeks later, the courthouse was full again, but this time it wasn't for a wedding. The name Linda Harrow appeared on the docket. She sat beside her attorney, her posture rigid. Gone was the sharp confidence she had worn like armor. She looked smaller, her gaze fixed on the table in front of her. Judge Alvarez entered, her presence commanding instant silence. She opened the file and scanned the pages before her. Ms. Harrow, she began. This court has reviewed the evidence, including recordings of your statements and the pattern of complaints you have filed in the past 3 years. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, we'd like to highlight that Ms. Harrow filed 17 complaints against events at Willow Creek Gardens. 15 of those involved gatherings attended primarily by minorities. A quiet murmur ran through the courtroom. Linda's attorney tried to speak. Your Honor, my client, the judge cut him off. Save it, I've seen the footage. I've heard the words. Ms. Harrow, you didn't just make a mistake. You abused public resources and weaponized law enforcement against innocent citizens. Naomi sat in the back row, her fingers entwined with Malik's. She could feel his pulse through his hand. Steady, controlled. But beneath it, she could sense the weight of every person who'd ever been judged without reason. The judge continued. For your actions, this court sentences you to 200 hours of community service, a fine of $10,000, and mandatory completion of racial sensitivity training. You will also be placed on probation for 2 years. Linda lifted her eyes for the first time, and in them was something closer to fear than anger. Your Honor, You will also issue a formal written apology to Sheriff and Mrs. Carter, the judge said. And I suggest you mean every word. When the gavel struck, it echoed like the final note of a long, bitter song. Outside, reporters gathered around the courthouse steps. Microphones and cameras turned as Malik and Naomi stepped into the sunlight. Questions flew. How do you feel about the verdict? What does this mean for the community? Malik answered simply. It's not about one verdict. It's about changing what allows this to happen in the first place, Naomi added. We're not here to celebrate someone's downfall. We're here to remind everyone that respect and equality should never be privileges. They should be constants. Over the following months, the ripples spread farther than either of them had imagined. Willow Creek Gardens came under new management. Every contract now included anti-harassment clauses. The local police department adopted Malik's verification protocol, requiring solid proof before responding to vague complaints. At community meetings, Naomi spoke about empathy, about the quiet harm done when prejudice hides behind concern. Malik trained officers in cultural awareness, teaching them how to see the difference between suspicion and bias. Linda's old house went up for sale. For the first time in decades, new families moved into the neighborhood, families that reflected the diversity of the world outside those fences. One of those new families invited Malik and Naomi to their daughter's birthday. When they arrived, the laughter spilling from the yard was full of something the town hadn't known in a long time: ease. Naomi looked around at the tables, the music, the mix of faces. "It's starting," she whispered. Malik smiled. "It's more than starting. It's working." But for all the healing, one question still lingered in his mind. What if he hadn't been a sheriff? What if his badge hadn't stopped the situation before it got worse? That question would follow him for months, and it would become the reason he pushed even harder to make sure no one else ever needed a badge just to be believed. A year later, Willow Creek Gardens looked different. Not in its structure, the lake still shimmered. The lawns were still trimmed to perfection, but in its energy. Where unease once lingered, laughter flowed easily. The place that had once been marked by one woman's prejudice had become the symbol of something entirely new. That afternoon, sunlight danced across a canopy of white tents. The sound of children playing drifted through the air as people from every part of the town gathered. At the front, a large banner hung between two trees. It read, "Community Unity Forum, creating spaces for everyone." Malik stood at the podium, his sheriff's uniform pressed crisp, his posture steady but humble. He looked out at the hundreds of faces before him, people who had once lived in quiet division now sitting side by side. "1 year ago," he began, "my wife and I stood on this very lawn to say our vows. But before we could finish our promises to each other, we were forced to prove we belonged here." A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. Malik continued, his voice even but filled with conviction. That day revealed more than one person's prejudice. It revealed a system that allowed it to thrive. And that's why we're here, to make sure it never happens again. Naomi sat in the front row, her hand resting on her growing belly. Her eyes glistened as she watched him speak. Every word carried the strength of what they'd endured and the hope of what was coming next. Behind Malik, the new venue manager, a young woman named Sierra stepped forward. "We've rewritten every policy from the ground up," she announced. "Every staff member is trained to protect clients against discrimination. Every complaint is documented, reviewed, and verified. No one will ever be told they don't belong here again." Applause swelled through the crowd. Malik stepped aside as Chief Daniels took the podium next. "We've implemented Sheriff Carter's verification system across the department," he said. "In the past 6 months, unverified complaint responses have dropped by over 60%. That's real change." He held up a small card, a checklist officers now carried. No more responding to "they don't look right." No more assumptions. Every call requires evidence, not fear. People clapped again, some standing this time. Naomi stood slowly when her name was called. She walked to the podium, graceful and sure, her presence soft but commanding. "Healing doesn't come from punishment alone," she said. "It comes from understanding the harm and choosing to do better. This community isn't perfect yet, but it's trying. And that means something." Her voice trembled slightly on the last words, but it wasn't weakness. It was honesty, the kind that makes people listen. When the speeches ended, Malik and Naomi walked together along the lake path. The air was filled with music now, real unburdened laughter echoing from the tents. Children from every background chased bubbles across the grass. The two of them stopped by the water's edge. "Do you ever think about that day?" Naomi asked quietly. "Every time I drive past here," Malik said, "but not with anger anymore." He looked out over the water, his reflection steady beside hers. "It's strange. The worst day of our lives became the start of something good." Naomi smiled. "That's how change works. It never feels like change when it starts. It feels like pain." He looked at her belly, resting his hand gently on it. "She'll grow up in a different town than the one we knew. She'll grow up knowing she belongs," Naomi said. Behind them, Sierra was giving a tour to a new couple looking to book the venue. The woman wore a bright red dress, and her partner, a soft-spoken man with brown skin and a gentle smile, held her hand as they listened. Malik watched them for a moment. "That's worth every fight," he murmured. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, he and Naomi walked back toward the crowd. Franklin, the former manager, stood near the entrance. He'd lost his position, but today he was there as a volunteer, handing out flyers for the new diversity program he helped develop. When he saw them, he nodded respectfully. "Good to see you, Franklin," Malik said. "I've got a lot to make up for," the man admitted. But thank you for letting me try. Naomi smiled kindly. Trying is where it starts. Later, as dusk settled over the lake, Malik took the stage one last time to close the forum. The string lights flickered above him, soft and warm. A year ago, I stood here and wondered if justice could ever be more than reaction, he said. Now I know it can be prevention. It can be community. It can be all of us deciding that enough is enough. He lifted a small glass plaque, newly awarded to him by the council, for turning pain into progress. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous or wild. It was steady, like the sound of rain, constant, cleansing, and real. Afterward, he and Naomi returned home, their house filled with family. Their newborn daughter slept peacefully in a cradle by the window, a soft blanket rising and falling with each tiny breath. On the wall behind her hung 2 framed photos, the first from their interrupted wedding, faces strained but unbroken, and the second from their vow renewal 6 months later, joy radiant in every expression. Naomi rocked their daughter gently. Do you think she'll ever understand what that day meant? She asked. Someday, Malik said. When she asks why people still fight for what's fair, I'll tell her about a wedding that stopped a town, and how it started everything after. They sat quietly for a while, watching the lights from Willow Creek shimmer across the distance. In that glow, the past and the future seemed to meet. Malik's voice broke the silence. You know, sometimes I think justice isn't about punishment. It's about memory. It's about making sure no one forgets why change had to happen. Naomi looked at him, her eyes soft but certain. And we didn't forget, she said. We lived it, and we turned it into something better. Outside, the night deepened, calm and clear. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying laughter from a nearby gathering, distant yet familiar. Malik reached over, took Naomi's hand and whispered, We changed something real. In the quiet of their home, surrounded by peace they had earned, the sound of their daughter's slow, steady breathing filled the room. It was small, simple, and stronger than all the noise that had come before it. It was proof that love, tested, tempered, and fearless, had the final word.